welcome back to what I believe is the 125th podcast episode. I'm your host, Mike K. Young, with a special guest of mine, Joel Tillis, and pastor in Florida. And it's a huge honor to have him on here. I say that a lot, but I always like to have people on here that I respect and that I appreciate their faithfulness in ministry. And especially they try to provide content that's helpful for people and trying to encourage people. And just want to say how much I appreciate you being on. And what I figured we could do today is maybe just share your testimony, share a little bit about yourself, where you are, and all those kinds of things, just for the listeners to kind of learn more about you, if you don't mind.
Sure. Well, it's an honor to be with you, and I appreciate you having me on. And it's just always an honor. I think I'm excited to see what the Lord's doing with your work, with the podcast. And the more good content out there, the better. So, for sure, there's a lot of bad content. So, long and short of it is, I grew up in a independent fundamental Baptist preacher's home. My dad pastored right at the heyday. He graduated Tennessee Temple back in the day in '78. And that was right in the heyday of the National Sword Conference, Pastor's School, Southwide Baptist Fellowship. I mean, that was,
Hmm.
we cut our teeth on Harold Seitler, Greer Baptist Camp, all those, Sammy Allen. And then, you went to Sammy Allen and Harold Seitler to learn how to preach. You went to Jack Hyles to learn how to build a church. You went to Lee Robertson to learn how to do missions. It was just that heyday in there. So my dad was involved in that. He pastored in Pennsylvania, and then Missouri. Actually ended up out in California at one time. But through a course of events, he actually got, for lack of a better word, burnt out, and came back to Florida and made a series of bad decisions in that space in his life, and we just drifted away from the Lord. And then eventually, he left my mom, and so it was a pretty traumatic, turn of events. I was one minute, a young boy sitting in the living room with Curtis Hudson, or yeah, Lester Roloff. Actually, Wiley Cameron came out and helped my dad start his home. So I mean, those are the guys we were around.
Hmm.
The next minute, my dad's driving a truck. He's left my mom. I'm 17 years old, and it's like, what do I do? Where do I
Hmm.
go? So, I was saved. I had felt at a young age that the Lord had called me to preach, but my world just got turned upside down. I mean,
Hmm.
literally turned upside down. My dad gone, pastor gone, my tribe, gone, and of course, I had been behind the scenes too, and I'd seen some of the nastiness.
Yeah.
All groups have it, but anyway. So I began to make a series of bad choices myself. My mom moved back to North Carolina, which is where I'm originally from. And so I was basically on my own. I had moved down to the coast here in Florida, and um, needed to make some money as quick as I possibly could, trying to live on my own, trying to survive. And I started waiting tables, and then I found out from waiting tables that was instant cash, and you were making a lot of it here at the beach.
Yeah.
And the drunker you got people, the more they spent money, the bigger tip you got.
Yeah.
So then I thought, well, man, if waiting tables is as much money, then how about bartending? And so now you can really get them loaded and really make money. And I was making, an obscene amount of money for a young man my age back at the time, so it was, you're making, anywhere from 700, sometimes even, beach work here, $1,000, over the course of 2 or 3 days in tips, and it's all in cash. So, plus it's a culture all on its own. And so I started, partying and learning how to party, and life got really, really out of hand real quick, really bad. So in all of that, I still knew that I was saved, but people use the term backslidden. I wasn't so much backslidden as I just didn't know where to go and what to do. And I was miserable. And on the outside, here's a young guy making a ton of money. It's just constant. But inside, I was just absolutely devastated, miserable. So I got a job transfer, got a job, and I'm sitting in the break room one day, and in walked what I thought was the prettiest thing I'd ever seen in my life, still do, my wife. She was working on her master's degree at the time at University of South Florida, and we both got our degree from University of South Florida, come to find out. But she was working on her master's degree. She was a manager, and she had been out for a couple of weeks. I had been working there a couple of weeks, and she came walking in, and man, I did my best to strike a pose. I had long hair and earrings, and I mean I just looked the part and cool and smoking. And she walked right past her. Didn't give me a time of day. Didn't give me a time of day. She was a sinner, but she was far more of a sophisticated sinner than I was. She would go to pubs. I would go to bars. That's what it was. But I kept on, kept on, kept on, wore her down. And finally, we started dating. I would, I'd go hang out at the pub with her. Then I'd drop her off and go to a real man's place, a bar, And so we were hanging out. And just like I said, I was miserable. She was lost. We were just doing our thing, making money. She was finishing up her degree or working on that master's degree. So one night we were sitting at a pub and there's a bunch of us sitting around. We're all drinking. We're outside. It's kind of and as we talk philosophy and religion there, she said, well, I don't believe in God. She goes, maybe I do. I'm just an agnostic. I'm like, wait. You're an agnostic. You don't believe in God. She goes, well, no, I don't think so. So, bro, I start leading her down the Romans road. I've got a pint of Guinness in one hand and a cigarette in the other, and I've been cussing a blue streak the last hour. And I'm like, well, listen, the Bible says for all of sin to come short of the glory of God. And she's like, wait a second, you're a Christian? And I'm like, well, technically, yes. And she said, well, if that's the case, then you prove my point.
Mm.
And man, it just destroyed me. And I went home that night. I actually had a Gideon Bible that I had stolen out of a hotel. And I just kind of started thumbing through it and landed on the most non-dispensational book that you could, Zechariah. I don't know why I got there, but Zechariah chapter 1 says, turn unto me, saith the Lord, and I will turn unto you. And that's exactly what I did. I just got down, said, Lord, I think I'm saved, but I don't know. But I know that I'm not happy, and I want you to save me, fix me, do whatever. And so that started a series of events of me beginning to walk with the Lord,
Mm.
cleaning up on the outside. I found a little church, started going back to it. It was a little Southern Baptist church. Um, and at the time, she wasn't my wife, but man, she thought something was wrong. Like, what's going on with you? But to make a long story short, I actually had the privilege of leading her to the Lord. She did get
Amen.
saved.
Mm.
And so we determined, next thing, okay, well, I knew that God had called me to preach. I wasn't sure what that was going to look like, but we need to go to Bible college. Well, Dr. Seitler had passed away. So, that's where I would originally had gone. So we're like, well, pastor school. I'm like, okay, I remember that when I was little. Let's head up there. So we went up to Hiles Anderson. And that was just not the place to be. That was not for us. We weren't kids fresh out of youth camp. So we went up there and there was a lot of good, but there was a lot of insanity too. But we transferred after about a year. So I was like, well, I remember Bob Gray in Jacksonville. That used to be a pretty good wild place. So we'll go down there. And Bob Gray was gone. It was different. And so it was just like, okay, where do I go? What do I do? Um, during that season, my dad had gotten right with the Lord. And back in the area where I was living, he had started a small church ish kind of a Bible study. Well, I moved back to the area and started working. And he's like, well, listen, I'm heading out. There's about 8 people here. Why don't you take over the Bible study and then see where the Lord leads you and what goes on from there?
Mm.
And so I was like, well, okay, that sounds good. I'll go teach the Bible to them on Sunday. And then, as soon as the Lord figures out where to lead me, I'll go. And that was almost 25 years ago. It was 24 years ago, and I haven't left since.
Huh.
Uh, so what happened was we got a little tiny building. I started studying. I had access to a computer. We had about maybe 15, 20 people for the first 3 years. Couldn't get anything to grow, but I was by myself, reading, studying. I knew enough research from college to be able to know how to research sources, and I just was able to do my own thing. I was able to be eclectic. I had a good foundation. I had a good foundation, but I was able to read and take what I thought was the best and piece things together. And then about the 5 year mark, we started growing a little bit. 7 years, there was a, believe it or not, the church where I had gone for just a short time when I got right, he knew my dad. That's how I went there in the first place. He said, "Listen, I'm leaving. If you want to merge, you can." They had just about folded up shop. They had built a big building and gymnasium, but were about to close the doors. So we had at this time probably about 50, 60 people, and we had people and no buildings. They had about 10 people, 15 people. They had buildings and no people. And so we merged. Basically, it was a kind, but it was a hostile takeover. We merged, changed the name, and just, took off from there and have been there ever
Mm.
since. So that really was how we got to where we are here. And then out of that just grew some of the other ministries that we have. And it's been very blessed. I would always recommend to start a church. I mean, some people take a church and are very successful, but it's allowed us to experiment, to see what works, what doesn't
Mm.
work, to try. And I think sometimes young men get involved in churches where they get locked into, you have to do it this way, and they never really get to experiment and find their own voice, find their own identity. I
Yeah.
was very blessed by accident to be able to do that. And so we've tried a lot of things. Some of them have failed. Some of them have failed galactically, but some of them have been very, very successful. And, so over the years, like I said, 24 years now, the Lord's just richly blessed us.
Amen. I love that. Thank you for sharing that. That was extremely refreshing to hear, and I never knew all that. So that's awesome. So this is kind of a curveball question. I know we didn't plan to talk about this, and but you talked about your dad being in ministry and then him facing burnout. From your experience of watching everything and then what you've seen in ministry, there might be some Christians listening here today that are maybe facing burnout. Like, do you have any advice for someone like that, or maybe how you've seen the progression of how people get burnout and how to stay away from that kind of thing?
Yeah. Well, that's a big phrase. When you say burnout, I'm brushing with a broad stroke. I
Yeah.
will say this, that everybody is different and every context is different. And
Mm.
I think sometimes we try to fix things with these kind of an IKEA type Christianity, just pull it out, put it together, and it'll work for you. And I just
Mm.
don't think that that's the case.
Yeah.
But I will say this, that I think that the V number, it's a two sides to the same coin as far as ministry burnout. The number one thing is we mistake the sprinkler system for the fruit. People say, "Well, I read my Bible, I pray, I read books, I evangelize, well, that's the sprinkler system. What we're really looking for is the fruit.
Mm.
And you have to walk with the Lord and really develop your own inner character and inner life. That's number one.
Mm.
The second thing is we have to change our expectations. All of us go into ministry with expectations. And sometimes what our ministry is, what it becomes, what it doesn't become, what we look around at other people, and we just have expectations of what it should be. And when it doesn't match that, we'll put flowery words on it, but it's really a deep disappointment. It's really a
Yeah.
deep disappointment. And so we need to let those expectations go and, serve the Lord. And as hard as it is, learn, as Paul said, to be content with what God gives us. Truth of the matter is, from Paul Chapel to Harold Site, it doesn't matter to who. There's not a person anywhere that can tell you how they built the church. If they can tell you how they built it, then it wasn't of God, in my
Mm.
opinion. So some men God blesses with great numbers, some men God doesn't. But there's a lot of country preachers I know that are unbelievably deep and unbelievably great preachers,
Mm.
but they just don't have the crowds. So I think we just have to learn to be content with where we are.
I love that. And I mean, even when you think about Jeremiah the prophet, we don't even, he's not even known to have one convert, but he was someone we preach on for years to come, and someone who made a big impact, or serving God. Obedience to God is the main thing,
Yeah.
not even looking at results.
Well,
Um,
nobody knows. Hudson Taylor, his main supporter was the Burgers, the family. They were a very wealthy
mm,
family. Nobody knows their name. Nobody knows the name of D.L. Moody's guy that he worked for, the shoe salesman that led him to the Lord. We don't know these names of those people, but the Lord does. And
mm,
so I think as preachers, as pastors, we have to be, or as anybody in ministry, we have to learn to be comfortable with who and what we are, and what God has given us. Of course, we don't
mm.
want to be lazy, but expectations can be very deadly, I think.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, so let's talk about your book because I know you wrote a book. I think it's called The Little Big Church, and so describe what that book's about and why you wrote that, if you would.
Sure. Well, the Little Big Church, you can go to thelittlebigchurch.com and get it. Here in the next several months, it'll probably be on Amazon. We also have, if you go to YouTube and put in the Little Big Church, all of our free resources are on there. We don't hide it behind a paywall so that you can go and see all the videos that we do and the information that's there. So the Little Big Church was basically based off of two things. Number one, our experience of doing what we do here, and then what we have seen as we travel around. I preach. I'm very blessed to preach out quite a bit. I do that. I'm able to do that in a lot of ways at my own cost. I want to do that because sometimes smaller churches aren't able. So I can fly in and pay for my own accommodations, and that helps smaller churches. Um, and so one of the things we saw is that there's a difference between being small and little. Small just means you're small in size. Little means you're little in your view and in your drive. And a lot of little churches feel like they can't do anything. Well, it's us four, no more. We're in the Laodicean age. We're going to hang in there. But I actually believe if the Lord tarries is coming, that the future belongs to the small, nimble, lean churches that are able to meet the needs in their community, that are able to adjust, that are able to really, they're small, but they have a big impact. And that's
Mm,
fundamentally what it's about. How to be small, but to swing above your weight class and have a big impact. It's not a
mm,
large book at all. It's very practical, very workable. And we've gotten it to several colleges, institutes. Of course, a lot of people have bought it. And it's just a real honest look and say, hey, maybe people don't like the truth that we're preaching. Maybe our nursery's dirty. Maybe we just need to mow the lawn. Maybe we need to change the light bulb.
mm,
Maybe we don't need the guy that's the usher that thinks that Michelle Obama's a man being the first person that a visitor meets when they walk in our door. Maybe we can make some adjustments here and learn some things and be more effective as a small church.
mm. Man, that's great. That's really great. And that's great that you're sharing that perspective with other people. That some people think about things a certain way, but you give them some good perspective. I love that. So, what's the story behind your podcast? So, I know there's the Soul Trap podcast. I've heard of it. I have friends that are going to my old church who've heard of it, and so it's spreading around. As far as people are like, "Hey, have you ever heard of this podcast?"
Yeah.
And so, how did that get started? What's the purpose of it? Because I know some people might look at it and be like, that's kind of crazy a little bit."
Yeah. Well, it is kind of crazy. I'll give you that. So, it is growing. We're actually going to be out in Oregon. I actually fly out Thursday. The second largest UFO festival is in Oregon. So they have tens and tens and tens and tens of thousands of people that come from all over the country. We have 5,000 gospel tracks geared around the Soul
Mm,
Trap theme. So we're going to be out there doing some interviews, but basically doing evangelism, getting it out there. So the Soul Trap started years ago. I, never thought a whole lot about any of this stuff. I was kind of just, cornbread and buttermilk, just basic. Somebody gave me a book called The Omega Conspiracy. I believe the pastor was over in England. And it's probably a foundational book. I should get the name of it. I can't remember the name of the pastor, but I'll get that to you. But anyway, basically what he did is he laid out that when you look at some of these paranormal events, when you look at quote unquote UFOs, or when you look at these paranormal, they sound very much like spiritual events in the Bible. And that piqued my interest. And so I began to read and I began to look, and there's also a book called As in the Days of Noah. I think his name is Dante Forston. We would not agree with him on a lot, but he did the same thing. He laid it side by side. And what they were basically saying is that they're using the word dimensional. We're using the word spiritual. They're using the word alien. We're using the word angelic or demonic. They're using the word possession. We're using, or they're using the word abduction. We're using the word possession. In other words, we're talking about the same thing. We're seeing the same thing. It's just we're using different languages. And so I begin to pursue that and begin to study that again from a scholastic background, reading research, journals, those kind of things like that. So one night I did a presentation on a Sunday night. I did a keynote presentation on a Sunday night about the alien agenda, about the abduction cases and how eerily they are. Well, my wife on the way home, she said, "Have you ever thought about maybe not doing that when all the kids are in the service?" She goes, because there's a lot of kids that are going to have some nightmares tonight. I'm like, "Well, you're right." So she got me set up. And the initial way I did it was with an iPhone. I would literally just record an audio. There was a fellow in our church by the name of John, who helped me. We started loading it up. Then at one point, we have a gentleman on our staff now, Kevin, very talented, very gifted. We begin to just grow in that space. We also have a co-producer with us, Samuel, who helps us do a lot of research as well, growing in that space. And so we just begin to develop that, and sometimes we just have silly fun with it. But sometimes we're looking at connecting the dots. Is there something there? Whether it's paranormal, archaeological, paragovernmental, is there something there? So you say, well, is there a governmental conspiracy? Is there a behind the veil? Well, yeah. In Luke chapter 4, Satan told you that. Satan looked at Christ and said, "The kingdoms of this world are mine. I'll give them to you." Well, that by definition is a conspiracy. That's somebody in the shadow pulling the strings. So we started studying it like that, and like I said, we have fun with some of it. But what we found is that sometimes the most unspiritual people are Christians. They're very materialistic,
Hmm.
but the world is becoming more and more spiritual. They're just using a different language. So it's allowed us to get into different venues, different contexts, speak to a different whole subset of people that we never would have. And they find that we're talking their language. The Bible is a paranormal book. I mean, one of the strangest things you could ever believe is the rapture. I mean, it's
Hmm.
very paranormal. Well, it
Right.
is an abduction. That's exactly what it is. You are abducting out of this world a subset of people. And so when you start looking at the language there, it's allowed us to really open up the doors. And we have down the road a book that we're going to be releasing. We have some different things that we're doing. And it's also allowed us to be evangelistic. We have one set up in Maryland. We've already done one in Texas with our brother Keegan, where we'll go in, and a lot of times they'll do it at an off-site from the church or even at the church, but we'll do a parent soul trap conference, like 2 or 3 days. Well, you're able to invite a lot of sinners in. So they're coming in to talk about alien abduction. We did one on 9/11, the conspiracy of 9/11, or Catholicism and the dark arts and things like that.
Yeah.
We able to bring a lot of sinners in. That generates leads for the church. It also generates an opportunity to go, listen, this is going on, in the presentation of the gospel. So it's just been a real great tool for everybody involved.
That is so interesting because you have so many different people who are like, I share the gospel this way. I give out tracts. I use this ministry to do this. And then you're like, yeah, we use paranormal aliens to get people to
Yeah,
Jesus.
yeah.
It's like, what in the world? I
Well, you'd
mean,
be surprised. There's a massive subset of people, whether it's alien or not. There's a massive subset of people out there that have encountered spiritual realities, but very few people want to talk about it because they don't want to be called crazy.
yeah.
But there is a huge subset of people out there, and I believe the closer we get to the coming of the Lord, the more that's going to grow and
Mm.
become reality. And so I think what we're doing is we're tapping into something that's there that people know nobody wants to talk about, but it's like, yeah, I experienced that, I felt that, I saw that, something happened, and so it makes a difference.
So I know the Bible talks about, you think that you're fighting with the person next to you, but we're not fighting against flesh and blood. We're fighting against the principalities and things like that. As a Christian, what are some of those things that we deal with when it comes to that? Because, the world sees it one way, obviously we see it, like you said, spiritually, but how is that affecting us? And then maybe what's the perspective of the courageous, like the way we can actually look at it, that we have the victory through those kind of things. Like, so if you wouldn't mind sharing some perspective on that.
So, well, I think probably the biggest encounter that we don't realize is the fog. There's a one of the things that you see when you read journal entries. I'm not talking about like History Channel stuff, but when you do journalistic research, data, peer research on these events, one of the commonalities that you hear them talk about is confusion. I was confused. I didn't understand what was going on. I didn't know
Mhm.
where I was. Nothing made sense. That kind of thing like that. Well, it's interesting because the Bible actually uses that word. God is not the author of confusion.
Mm,
And so I think one of the things that we see among Christians is we're battling a spirit of confusion. There is uh, there is a fog over the mind of the average Christian. And even though we're saved and we're indwelt by the Spirit of God, we are in a fog. We're incapable of turning our phones off. We're incapable of detaching from Netflix. We're incapable of going 1 hour without a digital connection. We're just as enculturated as the world is. And
mm,
so there's a real fog there. And because of that, our eternity perspective, we are timeless beings. And because of that, we've lost that timelessness. We're as connected to this world and detached from eternity as the average person. But in reality, we are the sons of God, according to First John. We,
mm,
we are the sons of God, which means we're going to be judging angels, which means we're going to be the image bearers, which means this light affliction works for us a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory. Most Christians can't think like that, and it's because Satan has kind of lowered that fog over us.
mm,
And so that's one area. I think pornography is another area that's profoundly the spirit the spiritual atmosphere has changed. So there's a lot of those different things like that we see that sometimes we think about the demonic is like the girl with her head spinning and projectile vomiting, but it's a lot more subtle than that. And I think what we're going to see probably in the near future, my personal belief is that we're going to see a golden era. I think we are going to see prosperity. I think we are going to see somewhat of a global peace. I think the hardest thing in the world for Christians are going to try to maintain their soul, not from outward persecution, but from inward prosperity.
mm.
That last church says, I'm increased and have need of nothing. The problem with the last church isn't that they're under persecution. The problem with the last church in the Laodicean age is that they're ridiculously rich, they're prosperous. And
Mm.
so I think that's what's going to be the real battle as we get near the end.
Man, that's a crazy way to think about these things. Because I know a lot of people might look at your podcast or the thoughts that you bring up around this and be like, we don't really need to be worrying about that stuff. Let's just keep on doing what we're doing. And I'm sure, have you had people talk to you about that before when you've
They
brought up
do. They do. It's interesting, when you think about the Bible says Jesus said, as in the days of Noah, so shall also be the coming of the Son of Man. Well, when you think about that time period, Enoch was roughly right at about that time period in the days of Noah. And we know that the sons of God were around. We know the sons of God were around in Noah's day. We know that they were there during Enoch. All right. Well, if Enoch is the type of the church, Noah's the type of maybe the Jew going through the tribulation, coming out the other side. If Enoch is a type of the church being raptured out and he was around those quote unquote sons of God, what makes you think that this New Testament church won't see an incursion once again of angels, the sons of God, coming down from the stars? And I'll give you another. We read Galatians chapter number 1. Though I or an angel from heaven, Paul said, preach any other gospel, let him be accursed. Now we look at that and we go, well, that's just an illustration, but maybe it's a warning.
Mm,
Maybe we are going to have to face one day angels like, oh, no, 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 you guys have gotten the gospel wrong. He warns us about it in Colossians.
Mm,
Colossians is an end time book. It's the only book that mentions Laodicea. It's the only connection. It's an end time book. And we're warned there by the Apostle Paul about angels. So I think we could see this world turn completely upside down before we get raptured out. I don't think we're just going to be walking through a mall and everything continuing as is. We
mm,
could see a golden era. We could see Gaza rebuilt, the temple rebuilt, angelic incursion coming down. I mean, we could see some really strange things that would make the church even more of a remnant than it already is.
mm. And you were talking about the confusion in Galatians 1 about the angels. I mean, you have different religions who have had that experience where it's like
Oh, yeah.
coming down like, this is the right thing, and then that's what causes confusion as well. Is I heard about this Jesus guy, but it's like, well, yeah, but this is the real way to do it.
Yeah,
There's
now
Jesus
you've
and
got
something.
Mormonism with Moroni and Mormonism. You've got Gabriel with the Muslims, and so yeah, it's a real possibility. And I think you may have something like that happen down the road, probably through Catholicism. But you may have something like that happen down the road. So we're especially when we start looking at AI. I mean, we're living in the days of Skynet.
Mm,
We're just waiting for it to come online, you
yeah.
know. So it's definitely an interesting time.
Man, well, I appreciate you coming on and sharing all this stuff with us, and it just kind of opens our eyes to, getting in the truth of the Word of God,
Mhm.
allowing us to be content and focusing on Him, and not just focusing on the prosperity of trying to get as much as we can, but being content and just
Yeah.
continuing to just serve God and have that real relationship with Him. As we close out, because I know we got about 4 or 5 minutes. Is there anything that you wanted to wrap up and say as far as to our listeners? It could be about anything at all that we've discussed or things that we've not hit on. Is there anything that you'd like to wrap up with?
Well, I just think, we started out with my testimony, and I think that one of the things that I would just encourage whoever's listening to is, right now I pastor, we do the Soul Trap, we do the Little Big Church book. I also am involved in the health space, and so I'm a personal trainer. I have a few small clients just that need physical help. So what I would say is that you walk with God. There is no cookie cutter model.
Mm,
Everybody is an individual. Everybody has a God has a plan. And so if you walk with God, just walk with Him. Let the Lord lead you. It may look like somebody down the road. Chances are it won't. But as long as you're in the book, walking with the Lord, living pure, doing the best you can, God has a way of using us all individually. And that's not a bad thing.
amen. Well, thank you for sharing that and sharing your time with us today. And I'll make sure to add your stuff into the description, the links and everything. And because it's cool that we're all sometimes focusing on different areas of
Yeah.
things that God shares, but the end goal is still not only to have a relationship with Him, but to reach other people as well.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
and that's a blessing. So thank you for taking your time today. And for those of you who are listening, thank you for taking your time. Please share this with someone. I know we got a lot of episodes out, but if you would, on Apple Podcasts, if you could leave us a review, or on Spotify, or just leave a comment if you're watching this on YouTube, just to get the word out more. And then I know this podcast will be a help to a lot of people as well. So thank you all for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.